Hello, my good friends. How are you today? God bless you all. Imagine a rainy night, a crumbling greenhouse, and a child in a wheelchair whispering, "You're leaving too, aren't you?" A woman, a small-town librarian with nothing but a bag of books, takes his hand and says no. But how did she get here? Trapped in a billionaire's world, accused of stealing millions of dollars, and fighting for a boy who's been abandoned too many times. Stay. This is a story of trust, betrayal, and a terrible twist you won't see coming. Subscribe and comment where you're watching the video where we'll begin this emotional journey. The rain hammered down outside. A steady tap, tap, tap against the cracked panes of the greenhouse tucked behind the Grayson estate. Inside, the air was damp and heavy. Thick with the smell of wet earth and overgrown ferns, nobody bothered to trim anymore. Sarah Jennings knelt on the cold stone floor, her jeans soaking up the chill, her breath fogging faintly in the dim light. In front of her, Oliver Grayson sat hunched in his wheelchair, his small hands gripping the armrests so tight his knuckles turned white. His dark brown eyes shimmered with tears he'd been holding back for who knows how long, and his voice came out in a shaky whisper, barely audible over the storm. "You're gonna leave too, aren't you?" Sarah's chest tightened. She'd seen that look before, back when she was a kid in Tacoma, staring at her reflection in a cracked bedroom mirror, wondering why nobody stuck around. She reached out, her fingers brushing his trembling hand. "No, Oliver," she said, her voice steady as a rock despite the lump in her throat. "I'm here for you, no matter what." A single tear rolled down his cheek, catching the faint glow of a lantern flickering on a rusty shelf nearby. It was the first time she'd seen him cry, the first time he'd let the wall around him crack. She pulled him into a hug, his skinny frame stiff at first, then softening as he buried his face in her shoulder. Rain streaked the glass walls around them, blurring the world outside into a gray haze. For a moment, it was just them. Sarah, the small-town librarian with a worn-out canvas tote, and Oliver, the kid who'd been left behind too many times. Through the foggy glass, a shadow loomed. Henry Grayson stood just beyond the door, his sharp silhouette framed against the storm. His hands were stuffed in the pockets of his tailored coat, and even from here, Sarah could feel the weight of his stare. Cold, unreadable, like he was sizing up a deal about to go south. He didn't move, didn't call out. He just watched. And Sarah wondered if he'd ever look at his son the way she did. 2 months earlier, Sarah Jennings was nowhere near the Grayson estate or its fancy greenhouse. She was at the Hawthorne Public Library, a crumbling old building on the edge of Seattle where the roof leaked during storms and the heat barely worked. It wasn't much. Wooden shelves sagging under the weight of dog-eared paperbacks, a couple of beat-up computers that hummed like they were on their last legs, and a faded sign out front that hadn't been repainted since the 90s. But to Sarah, it was home. She'd spent 5 years fighting to keep the place alive, hauling in donated books and begging the city council not to cut their funding. Books had saved her when she was a kid, growing up in a run-down duplex with a mom who worked double shifts and a dad who'd split before she could walk. She wasn't about to let this sanctuary die. That afternoon, the rain was coming down in sheets, drumming against the tall, arched windows and turning the world outside into a blurry mess. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and damp carpet. Sarah moved through the stacks with a stack of returns under her arm, her sneakers squeaking faintly on the worn linoleum. She was humming some half-remembered tune from the radio when she spotted him, a kid in a wheelchair parked by the children's section, tucked between a beanbag pile and a shelf of picture books. He wasn't moving, just staring up at the rows of colorful spines like they were a mountain he couldn't climb. His dark hair was combed neat, his sweater a little too big, and his hands rested limp on the chair's arms. But his eyes, big, brown, and hungry, told her everything she needed to know. "Hey, kiddo," she said. setting her books down on a nearby table and crouching to his level. "Looking for something fun?" He didn't answer, just flicked his gaze to her for a split second before darting back to the shelf. Shy, maybe, or scared. She'd seen it before. Kids who didn't know how to ask for what they wanted. Smiling, she reached for a book with a bright blue cover, The Dragon's Quest, its edges worn from years of little hands flipping through it. "This one's got dragons and brave knights. Want to give it a shot?" He hesitated, then gave a tiny nod. "Good enough." Sarah plopped onto the carpet beside him, cracking the book open. "All right, here we go," she said, her voice dipping into the animated tone she used for story time. "Once upon a time, in a kingdom of mist and shadow, there lived a knight who feared no dragon." She threw in sound effects, a growl for the dragon, a whoosh for the knight's sword, and glanced at him. His lips twitched, just a little, and then, a miracle, a breathy chuckle slipped out when the knight dodged a blast of fire. It was small, barely there, but it hit Sarah like a lightning bolt. This kid needed this, maybe more than she'd realized. She didn't notice the man watching from across the room. Henry Grayson stood near the checkout desk, his dark suit crisp against the library's faded backdrop. He'd come to pick up his son, but now he lingered, arms crossed, eyes locked on Sarah like she was some puzzle he couldn't figure out. The rain outside softened, but the air in the library felt heavier with every page she turned. The next day, Sarah was locking up the library, fumbling with her keys in the drizzle, when a sleek black car rolled up to the curb. The driver, a guy in a stiff suit who looked like he'd never smiled a day in his life, stepped out and handed her an envelope. "Miss Jennings," he said, voice flat. "Mr. Grayson requests your presence. Tomorrow, 3 p.m. I'll be here to pick you up." She blinked, rainwater dripping off her hoodie. "Grayson? Who? Wait, the kid's dad?" The driver didn't answer, just tipped his head and slid back into the car. The envelope felt thick in her hands, expensive paper with a gold-embossed G she didn't recognize. She tore it open on her way to the bus stop, her sneakers splashing through puddles. Inside was a note, typed and to the point. "Miss Jennings, I've seen what you can do. I'd like to hire you to work with my son Oliver. Name your terms. Henry Grayson." Her stomach flipped. Henry Grayson wasn't just some random dad. He was the Henry Grayson, tech billionaire, Seattle royalty, the guy whose name popped up in headlines about million-dollar deals and cutthroat business moves. And he wanted her? A librarian who barely made rent? She stuffed the note into her bag, her mind racing as the bus rumbled up. That night, she sat on her lumpy couch in her tiny apartment, the TV flickering with some late-night infomercial she wasn't watching. The Hawthorne Library was her life, her fight. But it was dying, and she knew it. Budget cuts were coming, and the city didn't care about a leaky old building full of books. Then there was Oliver, those quiet eyes, that little laugh. Something about him stuck with her, like a splinter she couldn't pull out. The next afternoon, the car was back, idling outside the library like a shiny black omen. Sarah stood under the awning, clutching her tote, rain dripping off the brim. Henry Grayson stepped out this time, his face all sharp angles and cool control. "Miss Jennings," he said, voice smooth but firm. "I don't waste time. You've got something my son needs. Name your price." She bristled, crossing her arms. "It's not about money. I'm not some hired fix for your kid." His eyes narrowed, just a flicker. "Then what are you?" She met his stare, chin up. "Someone who gives a damn. But I've got a library to save, Mr. Grayson. I don't know if I can just drop everything for you." He didn't blink. "Think about it. Oliver doesn't laugh for just anyone." Then he turned, sliding back into the car, leaving her standing there with wet shoes and a decision she didn't want to make. Hey folks, what would you do if you were Sarah? Stick to your roots or take a leap into the unknown? Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below to let me know. We're just getting started. Sarah Jennings had never been anywhere like the Grayson estate. The place was a damn palace, white stone columns soaring up to a roof that looked like it belonged in some fancy architecture magazine, sprawling gardens dripping with roses and ivy, and a driveway long enough to double as a runway. It sat perched on Capitol Hill, overlooking Seattle's twinkling skyline, the kind of spot where you'd expect tech moguls and movie stars to sip champagne, not a librarian in scuffed sneakers and a thrift store hoodie. She stepped out of the black car Henry had sent, her beat-up canvas tote slung over her shoulder, feeling like a fish flopping on dry land. The air smelled faintly of rain and money, two things she wasn't used to mixing. A butler, yeah, an actual butler, met her at the massive double doors, his face blank as a sheet of paper. "Miss Jennings," he said, voice clipped, and led her inside without another word. The foyer hit her like a punch, vaulted ceilings, a chandelier dripping crystals that caught the light like tiny suns, and walls lined with art she vaguely recognized from some college textbook. A Picasso, maybe? She wasn't sure, but it screamed expensive. Her sneakers squeaked on the polished hardwood, and she winced, half expecting someone to shush her. They passed a maid fluffing a velvet cushion and a guy in a suit carrying a silver tray, all of them sneaking glances her way like she was an alien who'd wandered in. She caught whispers drifting from a hallway. "She's the new tutor?" one voice hissed, low and skeptical. "A librarian, I heard. Not exactly the type you'd expect here," another replied. Sarah's grip tightened on her bag. She squared her shoulders and kept walking. She wasn't here to impress these people. She was here for Oliver. The butler dropped her off in a room that must have been Oliver's, a big space with floor-to-ceiling windows, a bed piled with pillows, and shelves stuffed with toys that looked brand new, untouched. But it felt empty, like a showroom instead of a kid's hideout. Oliver was there, parked by the window, staring out at the drizzle. He turned when she walked in, his dark eyes lighting up just a fraction. "Hey, kiddo," Sarah said, dropping her bag and pulling out the Dragon's Quest. "Ready to see what our knight's up to today?" He nodded, a little quicker this time, and she settled onto the carpet beside him. She read, her voice dipping and soaring with the story, dragons roaring, swords clashing, the knight facing down his fears. Oliver listened, still quiet, but his hands twitched like he wanted to grab the pages himself. Halfway through, he piped up, voice soft as a whisper, "Why do you think the knight's brave?" Sarah paused, caught off guard. She tapped the book's cover, thinking. "Because he's got something worth fighting for, like you." Oliver's lips curved into a real smile, small but bright, and something warm bloomed in her chest. She'd cracked through just a little. Maybe this crazy leap wasn't a mistake, but not everyone saw it that way. Back home that night, Sarah sprawled on her couch, the TV buzzing with static, when her sister Ellen called. Ellen was older by 3 years, a cashier at a Tacoma Safeway who'd never met a situation she didn't overanalyze. "You're working for Henry Grayson?" Ellen's voice crackled through the phone, sharp with disbelief. "Sarah, those rich folks don't care about us. You're just a pawn to them, some feel-good project he'll toss when he's bored." Sarah rubbed her temple, staring at a water stain on her ceiling. "It's not like that, Elle. The kid, Oliver, he's different. He needs someone. Needs someone with a degree, maybe," Ellen shot back. "Not a librarian who can't even keep her own place from falling apart. What happens when they figure out you're not fancy enough?" Sarah bristled. "I'm good enough for him. That's what matters." But Ellen's words stuck like burrs, prickling at the edges of her confidence. The next day, Henry cornered her in the estate's study. a room lined with leather-bound books and a desk bigger than her kitchen table. He leaned against it, arms crossed, his gray eyes slicing through her like a blade. "You're settling in," he said, more statement than question. "Oliver seems engaged." "Yeah," Sarah replied, keeping her tone even. "He's a great kid." Henry's jaw tightened, just a flicker. "People always want something, Miss Jennings. What's your angle?" She clenched her fists, heat rising in her cheeks. "I'm here for Oliver, not your damn bank account. If you think I'm some gold digger, you've got the wrong girl." He didn't flinch, just studied her like she was a contract he couldn't sign yet. "We'll see," he said, and walked out, leaving her steaming in the quiet. That wasn't the worst of it. Later that week, her boss at the library, a wiry guy named Pete, pulled her aside as she clocked in. "Got bad news, Sarah," he said, scratching his gray stubble. "City's slashing our budget again. We might not make it past spring." Her stomach dropped. "What?" "Pete, we've got the community program, the kids." "I know." He cut in, voice tired. "But they don't care. You've got till March to figure something out, or we're toast." She nodded, numb, and spent the rest of her shift shelving books with a pit in her gut. The library or Oliver. She couldn't save both. Not with her paycheck barely covering rent and the bus fare she scraped together every week. Things came to a head one rainy evening at the estate. Sarah stayed late with Oliver, curled up in his room with a new book, a tale about a lost prince finding his way home. The kid was hooked, his eyes wide as she read about the prince dodging bandits. When she hit a quiet part, he spoke up, voice barely above the patter of rain outside. "My last tutor left after Dad paid her," he said, picking at a thread on his sweater. She didn't even say goodbye. Sarah's heart sank. She set the book down, turning to face him fully. "I'm not going anywhere, kid. Promise." His shoulders relaxed, and he gave her that shy smile again, like he believed her, at least for now. But as she packed up to leave, the air in the mansion shifted. Ruth Coleman, the Graysons' longtime housekeeper, stepped into the hallway, her silver hair pulled tight in a bun, and her lips pressed thinner than usual. She was a fixture here, 60-something, all sharp edges and quiet loyalty, the kind of woman who'd seen everything and said little. Tonight, though, she had something to say. "I saw you," Ruth said, voice low and accusing, her arms crossed tight. "Last night, near the study, alone." Sarah froze, her bag halfway zipped. "What are you talking about? I wasn't—" "Don't play dumb," Ruth snapped. "Mr. Grayson's rare manuscript, the one worth a fortune. It's gone. And you were the only one unaccounted for." The words hit like a slap. Sarah's mouth went dry, her pulse hammering in her ears. "I didn't take anything," she said, forcing her voice steady. "I've never even been in that room after hours." Ruth's eyes narrowed, cold and unyielding. "We'll see what Mr. Grayson thinks." She turned on her heel and disappeared down the hall, leaving Sarah standing there, the weight of the accusation pressing down like a storm cloud ready to burst. She stumbled into the sitting room, her mind racing. The study. Was that the locked door she'd passed last night after reading to Oliver? She'd lingered in the hall, sure, waiting for the driver, but she hadn't gone near it. Had she? The mansion's silence felt suffocating now, the chandeliers glaring down like eyes. She'd fought so hard to belong here, to mean something to Oliver, and now it was unraveling over something she didn't do. Down the corridor, she heard Henry's voice, low, clipped, talking to someone on the phone. "Find out who was here. I want answers by morning." Her stomach twisted. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a trap closing in. Things are heating up. Will Sarah lose everything she's built with Oliver? Subscribe now and tell me in the comments. Do you think she's innocent or caught in a trap? We've got more twists coming your way. Sarah Jennings stood in the Grayson Estates grand hallway, her sneakers rooted to the hardwood as Ruth's accusation echoed in her head like a bad song on repeat. The missing manuscript, some rare million-dollar thing Henry kept locked in his study, was gone, and somehow she was the fall guy. The air felt thick, the kind of heavy that presses on your chest and makes every breath a fight. She could hear the faint clink of silverware from the kitchen, the muffled voices of staff pretending not to listen, but all she could think was, this can't be happening. She didn't sleep that night. Back in her cramped apartment, she sat cross-legged on her bed, a chipped mug of instant coffee going cold in her hands. The rain tapped against her window, a steady Seattle drizzle that matched the churn in her gut. She wasn't a thief. Hell, she'd never even jaywalked. But how do you prove something you didn't do? And Oliver? What would he think if she got booted out of his life over this? She'd promised him she'd stay. That promise kept her up, gnawing at her until the sun peeked over the skyline. The next day, she marched back to the estate, her jaw set and her tote stuffed with a notepad and a half-baked plan. If they wanted to pin this on her, she'd damn well find out who really took that manuscript. She wasn't about to let Oliver down, or let Henry Grayson's icy stare scare her off. She slipped into the mansion's library, not the study, but a side room with tall shelves and a long oak table, figuring it was a safe spot to think. The place smelled like leather and dust, a faint glow spilling from a brass lamp in the corner. That's when she caught it, a slip of paper wedged under a stack of old ledgers, half hidden like someone had shoved it there in a hurry. She tugged it free, her pulse kicking up. It was a receipt, crumpled and smudged, but legible. Payment confirmed. $50,000. D. Carter to R. Klein. Rare books looted. Her brain raced. D. Carter. Daniel Carter, Henry's personal assistant, the guy who'd been hovering around the estate for years, always in a pressed suit with a smile that never reached his eyes. She'd seen him near the study a dozen times, clipboard in hand, all quiet efficiency. Too quiet, maybe. Sarah dug deeper, flipping through a ledger she found on the table. Tucked inside was a scribbled note. Klein, final bid, 1.2 M, deliver by 3:15. That was 3 days ago. Her hands shook as she pieced it together. Daniel wasn't just skimming pens from the office. He was running a side hustle, selling off Henry's prized collection to some underground book dealer. And now, he'd set her up to take the blame. She grabbed her phone, snapped photos of everything, and bolted for Henry's office. This was her shot. She found Daniel first, though, cornered him in the study itself, the door half open and the air thick with tension. He was rifling through a drawer, his back to her, a flash drive in his hand like he was about to erase something. She didn't think, just acted. "Thought you could pin this on me, huh?" she said, stepping in and slamming the door shut behind her. Her voice was steady, but her heart was pounding like a drum. Daniel spun around, his slick smile faltering for a split second before sliding back into place. "Miss Jennings," he said, smooth as oil. "You're out of your league, librarian. Go back to your storybooks." She held up her phone, the receipt glowing on the screen. "And you're out of a job. 50 grand to Rare Books Limited. Real classy, Daniel. What's the final bid? 1.2 million? Bet Henry'll love that." His face tightened, eyes narrowing to slits. "You don't know what you're messing with," he hissed, stepping closer. "Walk away, or you'll regret it." "Too late," she shot back, standing her ground. "I'm not the one who screwed here." She turned on her heel and stormed out, her blood roaring in her ears. She had him, and she wasn't letting go. Henry's office was a fortress. Dark wood walls, a massive desk, and a view of the gardens that could have been ripped from a postcard. Sarah burst in without knocking, her phone and the crumpled receipt clutched in her fists. Henry stood behind the desk, mid-conversation with a security guy in a black uniform, but he stopped cold when he saw her. His gray eyes locked on hers, sharp and unyielding. "Here's your thief," she said, slamming the evidence onto the desk. "Daniel Carter's been selling your stuff to some shady book dealer. I didn't take a damn thing, and I've got proof." Henry didn't move, just stared at her like she'd grown a second head. The security guy shifted, glancing between them, but Henry waved him off. "Leave us," he said, voice low. The guy nodded and slipped out, shutting the door with a soft click. Henry picked up the receipt, his fingers tightening as he scanned it. Then he flipped through the photos on her phone, his jaw clenching harder with every swipe. "You're sure about this?" he asked, his tone edged with something dangerous. "I wouldn't be standing here if I wasn't," Sarah replied, crossing her arms. "Check your ledgers, your bank records, whatever. It's all there." He exhaled sharply, leaning back against the desk, and for a second, he looked almost tired, like the weight of it all was finally hitting him. "Daniel's been with me for years," he muttered, more to himself than her. "I trusted him." "Yeah, well," Sarah said, softening just a hair, "that's what makes people like him dangerous. They bank on that trust." Henry's gaze flicked up to her, and for the first time, there was something else in it. Not just suspicion, but a grudging flicker of respect. He opened his mouth to say something, but a shout cut through the room. A kid's voice, raw and panicked, echoing from the hall. "Dad! Where is she?" Sarah's stomach dropped. "Oliver." She bolted for the door, Henry right behind her. They found Ruth in the corridor, her face pale, hands wringing. "He overheard you," she said, voice trembling. "About the manuscript. He thinks you're sending her away. He took off in his chair. I couldn't stop him." "Where?" Sarah snapped, already moving. "The greenhouse," Ruth stammered. "He always goes there when he's upset." Sarah ran, her sneakers pounding the floor, Henry's footsteps thundering behind her. The rain had picked up, slamming against the windows as she burst outside, the cold biting at her skin. The greenhouse loomed ahead, a glass shell half swallowed by overgrown vines. She shoved the door open, her breath hitching at the sight. Oliver, tucked in a corner behind a row of dusty pots, his wheelchair tilted against a bench. His hands covered his face, shoulders shaking. "Oliver," she called, softer now, dropping to her knees beside him. The damp stones soaked through her jeans, but she didn't care. "Hey, it's me." He didn't look up, just whispered, "You're gonna leave too, aren't you?" His voice cracked, small and broken, and it hit her like a punch. "No, Oliver," she said, reaching for his hand. "I'm here for you, no matter what." She pulled him into a hug, his skinny frame trembling against her. A tear slipped down his cheek, then another, and he clung to her like she was the only thing keeping him afloat. From the doorway, Henry watched, rain streaking the glass behind him. His hands were shoved in his pockets, his face unreadable, but his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, flickered with something new. Doubt, maybe, or guilt. He'd pushed this too far, and now his son was paying for it. Sarah held Oliver tighter, the storm raging outside. She'd cleared her name, but this was bigger. This was about trust, and she wasn't letting it break. We're at the edge. Will trust win, or will it all fall apart? Smash that subscribe button and comment your predictions. The truth's coming next. The rain had stopped, leaving the Grayson estate draped in a damp, silvery hush. Inside Henry's office, the air was still heavy, but the storm between them had shifted. Sarah stood near the door, her arms crossed, watching Henry behind his massive desk. The evidence she'd slammed down, receipts, photos, proof of Daniel Carter's betrayal, lay scattered across the polished wood like a confession nobody could ignore. Henry's face was a mask, but his hands, clenched into fists, betrayed him. He'd been wrong, and they both knew it. He finally looked up, his gray eyes meeting hers. "I misjudged you," he said, voice low, almost rough around the edges. "You've got guts I didn't see." Sarah raised an eyebrow, not letting him off easy. "It's not about guts, Mr. Grayson. It's about Oliver." She paused, letting that sink in. "I'm not here for your approval. I'm here for him." Henry's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He reached for his phone, his movements sharp, decisive. "Get Daniel Carter in here now," he barked to whoever was on the other end. Then he leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face like he was trying to scrub away years of mistrust. "I don't trust easily," he said, quieter now, almost to himself. "And when it's broken, I act fast. Too fast, maybe." Sarah didn't budge. "Yeah, well, Oliver believed in me from the start. He didn't doubt me for a second." Her voice softened, just a touch. "Kids see the truth before we do." Henry flinched. Barely, but she caught it. He nodded, slow and deliberate, like her words had hit a nerve he didn't want to admit was there. "You could have walked away," he said, eyeing her. "Most people would have." "I thought about it," she admitted, shrugging. "But then I realized something." She met his gaze head on. "I wasn't just proving myself to you. I was proving to him that people don't just disappear when shit gets hard." For a moment, Henry didn't say anything. Then a ghost of a smirk tugged at his lips, self-deprecating, almost human. "I owe you an apology." "You do?" Sarah said, blunt as ever. She tilted her head, sizing him up. "For Oliver's sake, I hope you mean it." He huffed a quiet laugh, the first real crack in his armor she'd seen. "I'll do better," he said. And she believed him, not because he'd said it, but because he looked like a man who'd just realized what he'd almost lost. The fallout came fast. Daniel Carter was hauled into the office an hour later, his slick confidence gone, replaced by a nervous twitch in his jaw. Henry didn't waste words. "You're done," he said, voice cold as steel. "The manuscript's on its way back, and you're lucky I'm not pressing charges." Daniel tried to stammer an excuse, but Henry cut him off with a look that could have frozen lava. Security escorted him out, his tailored suit rumpled and his career in ashes. The staff stopped whispering when Sarah walked by after that. No more sideways glances, no more hushed doubts. She'd proven herself, and they knew it. Ruth Coleman found her later, lingering in the hallway with a tray of tea she didn't seem to need. The housekeeper's sharp edges had softened, her silver bun a little looser than usual. "I was wrong about you," she said, voice gruff but sincere. "I saw you near that hall and, well, I've seen too many come and go. Thought you'd be the same." Sarah shrugged, offering a small smile. "I get it. Trust's a hard thing around here." Ruth nodded, her eyes distant. "Lost my boy years back. Car wreck. Same as what happened to Oliver's legs. I get protective. Too much, maybe." She hesitated, then added, "You're good for him. Don't let Mr. Grayson forget that." "I won't," Sarah said, and Ruth gave her a rare, tight-lipped nod before shuffling off. Back home, Ellen called again, her tone lighter this time. "Heard you took down some fancy assistant," she said, a grin in her voice. "You're tougher than I thought, sis." Sarah laughed, sprawled on her couch with a beer she'd earned. "Tough enough to keep the library going, too. Grayson's cutting me a check. Part of it's for Hawthorne." Ellen whistled. "Well, damn. Guess I was wrong about the rich guy. Don't let it go to your head." "Too late," Sarah teased, and they both chuckled, the tension between them easing like a knot untying. A week later, Sarah was back at the estate, a permanent gig as Oliver's educational advisor locked in. Henry's words, not hers. It wasn't just reading books anymore. It was helping him find his voice, his spark. And he was changing. Fast. The kid who'd barely spoken now asked questions, pointed at pictures, even laughed out loud when she did goofy voices for the characters. His walls were crumbling piece by piece, and Sarah felt every crack like a victory. That afternoon, she'd decided to shake things up. She'd rounded up some local kids, including Mia, a scrappy 10-year-old with braids and a gap-toothed grin who'd been Oliver's buddy before Henry got too protective. Sarah had pitched it to him as a one-off, a little reading circle in the estate's sunroom, a big glass-walled space flooded with light. Henry had grunted his okay, probably figuring it'd keep Oliver busy. He didn't know she'd turn it into something more. She set up a pile of cushions and a stack of books, The Dragon's Quest, some Narnia, a beat-up copy of Charlotte's Web, and let the kids loose. Oliver rolled in, hesitant at first, but lit up when he saw Mia. "You came," he said, voice bright, and she punched his arm lightly. "Duh, you dork. Missed you," Mia replied, plopping down beside him. The other kids, 5 of them, all giggles and messy hair, sprawled out, chattering as Sarah cracked open a book. She read about a prince lost in a forest, her voice weaving the story into the air, and the room filled with gasps and laughs. Oliver leaned forward, eyes wide, whispering to Mia about the prince's sword. Halfway through, Sarah glanced up and froze. Henry stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching. She braced for him to shut it down, to bark about strangers in his house. But he didn't. He stepped in, quiet as a shadow, and sank onto a cushion between 2 kids who barely noticed. His suit jacket bunched awkwardly, his tie loosened, and he listened, really listened, as she spun the tale. When the prince found his way home, one of the kids cheered, and Henry smiled. A real one, small but warm, the kind that crinkled his eyes. She finished the story, closing the book with a soft thud. Oliver rolled over, his wheelchair creaking faintly, and looked up at her. "Will you read to me again tomorrow?" he asked, his hands resting on the pages. Sarah's throat tightened. She brushed a hand over the worn cover, smiling. "Of course, kiddo. Always." He grinned, satisfied, and she knew she wasn't going anywhere. Across the room, Henry caught her eye. He didn't say anything, just nodded once, slow and deliberate. She nodded back. For the first time, they understood each other. No words needed. The sun dipped lower, painting the room gold, and the kids' laughter bounced off the glass. It wasn't about money or power or fancy houses. It was about this: trust, connection, a promise kept. Sarah leaned back, watching Oliver chatter with Mia. Henry still parked on that cushion like he belonged there. Sometimes, she thought, the smallest things, a story, a hand reaching out, could change everything. And that was worth more than all the gold in Seattle. That's the end. But what did this story mean to you? Subscribe for more tales like this and drop a comment. What's your favorite moment? Was it Oliver's smile, Sarah's fight, or Henry's change of heart? Let me know. I'm reading every one.